So you guys know that I love hybrids because they're really easy to grow, but sometimes there's some species that are almost bulletproof. They're very easy to grow. I have a couple of those species, and the Dendrobium kingianum comes to mind when I think of bulletproof, very easy to grow. And then this one, the Brassavola Nodosa, is also super, super easy to grow. So in today's video, I want to talk a little bit more about this species orchid, talk about the crosses, the characteristics of it, and why it's so easy to grow. If you like this kind of video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more orchid content. So let's jump right in here. So the Brassavola Nodosa, I got this in November of last year. It has so many crosses. You guys have heard of BLC orchids. Those are Brassavola Cattleya orchids. So this orchid adds a ton of vigor to so many other Cattleya crosses. I made a video on the different crosses. You could check it out right here if you want to see more. But I just find that on its own, it's very, very vigorous. It's the first time that this one blooms for me. I also have the Brassavola Little Stars, which looks very similar. The flowers on the Little Stars is a little bit smaller, but this is the actual species. This is a species that's native to South America. So from Mexico, Guatemala, Venezuela, Colombia, you could find these as epiphytes. So they grow on trees. And you can also find these growing on rocks, and those are considered lithophytes. The Dendrobium kingianum is similar in that it also grows on rocks. So that's why I think these orchids are so hardy. They don't require much from you to be able to get them to bloom, and that's why I like it so much. You could go without watering this for a very, very long time, and it's going to be okay. In fact, some of the instructions say to give this a 2-week period of no water to induce blooming. I've done that to my Little Stars, and I had a lot of success. I didn't do it to this one this year because it was the first year I had it. I had just repotted it. It was acclimating to my conditions, so I didn't do that, but it can go long times without water. The leaves are very succulent-like, so they store a lot of water for this orchid, so that's why it's so, so hardy. Again, I haven't had this so long, but it flowers. I've read that it flowers a couple of times per year. I saw between 2 and 4. The Little Stars for me also blooms a couple of times per year, but over time, I will know how often it blooms. If the hybrid blooms more than the species, I will let you guys know. You know that I keep you updated on all of my orchids over time. But what's nice about these flowers is that they can last 3 to 4 weeks. Not only that, what gives it away is the white color on the flower, but this is a nocturnal bloomer. So this orchid is highly, highly fragrant, and it's fragrant at night. And this orchid is also known as the Lady of the Night orchid. So it has a very strong jasmine, lemony fragrance that you get at night. It's beautiful, and like a lot of nocturnal bloomers, this has such a light little bloom. I remember my Angraecum didieri was also white. My Neophanetia falcata, that's also a nocturnal bloomer. That one also has a beautiful fragrance, but these nocturnal bloomers, the fragrance at night tends to be quite strong. My Little Stars, it fills a room. This one is quite strong, but because it doesn't have as many flowers yet, it's not filling a room yet, but when you get close to it, you could smell it at night. It's lovely. You don't need too much to care for this orchid. You could treat it just like any Cattleya orchid. In terms of light, they need bright indirect light. So if you're growing this on a windowsill, a filtered south-facing window would be great. A west-facing window would have to be filtered. North-facing window in the northern hemisphere won't be enough. East-facing window, unfiltered, is usually fine, but you want to keep it away from anything too strong and direct. You want to filter that light because it can burn the leaves, but with any orchids, any Cattleya orchids that are more high light, they just need that bright, indirect light. But as with any Cattleyas that require high levels of light, you want the light to be bright, but filtered. It could be through a sheer curtain, through blinds. You'll be able to get it to bloom, provided the conditions are bright. A lot of times when they don't bloom, a lot of folks leave comments down below saying, I haven't been able to get this orchid to bloom. I usually tell them two things. How long have you had it? Because sometimes it takes a while to adapt to your conditions. So I got this in November of last year, and it's blooming now, and it's almost September. So that just gives you an idea of, it took almost a year to get it to bloom. I say you have to give an orchid at least a year to adapt to your conditions. Sometimes they'll surprise you and bloom sooner, especially if they're very vigorous hybrids. But with cattleyas, you have to give them time to adapt. And then once you've given them time, if it's not blooming, I say you have to make sure that the light is bright enough. So if you're growing under LED lights, which I do, I give them 12 to 14 hours of LED lights. And something like this, I keep it not too far away from the light. So it's not more than a foot away from the lights. It's just getting pretty intense light. I see new growths coming in all the time. That's a sign that you're on the right track. But if it's not blooming, did you give it enough time? Did you give it enough light? Those are the most important factors. And then we got to talk about the temperatures. So this is a Cattleya. It's warm, hot growing Cattleya. This is very adaptable. You could treat this like any Cattleya orchid, and Cattleyas usually like it between 70 and 85 degrees. You could go a little higher, a little bit lower, and it's perfectly fine. But when some Cattleyas don't bloom, it's because they're not getting a nighttime temperature differential. So this happens naturally for me in my conditions, even though I grow indoors, because the lights, they add heat to the to the room. So that's why I'm not recording in my plant room, basically from the spring till now, because it's so warm in there. But I'll start recording in there again very soon now that it's cooling down. But when those lights turn off, the temperatures go down. And now that it's getting cooler, I also crack a window open. So you want to make sure that the temperatures between the day and night are at least 10 degrees different, especially if you have species. 15 degrees is ideal, I think. You want to make sure they get a little bit of a fluctuation when you're growing. But so that's a tip that I'd give to all growers that are not seeing blooms on their orchids. This is humidity. Humidity-wise, this is not fussy. If you could give it 40% humidity, it's fine. In the winter, sometimes I have 20% humidity. It's not a big deal. I have this in bark with a tiny bit of moss in there just to hold a little bit more moisture, and this is fine. I think when it comes to humidity, a lot of times it's the roots that need that extra humidity. So 40% humidity is fine, ideally 40 to 60, but I don't even get that sometimes. I get it in the summer. I get a lot of high humidity in the summer, but in the winter, I don't get it that much. I don't always run a humidifier, and it's okay. And that's with this one. Some species are fussier, and they're going to need more, but this one is perfectly fine with your average home humidity. In terms of watering, you want to water it and then let it dry. So this one has a little moss in it, just a tiny bit, maybe about 10, 15%. I didn't put too much, but it holds enough moisture to where I only need to water this once a week, and then it's fine. So I water it, let it dry, water it again, and it's totally fine. And with regards to fertilizer, fertilizer is important, but it's not as important as getting it enough light. It'll get some nutrients just from the bark as it breaks down. But I fertilize every week, but with a weak solution. So I use half strength, usually in the summer, and then I trickle that back to quarter strength, or maybe even a little less in the winter. And then a lot of growers of this orchid say to give it a 2-week dry period, as I mentioned earlier, to harden off the growths. I find that it works well. This does not sulk on me. It doesn't get wrinkly on me. If your plant is wrinkled, it's dehydrated. But I do give it a period of 2 weeks, no fertilizer, no water, and it is perfectly fine. And then, as I said, I didn't do it to this one, but I've done it with my little stars, and it grows beautifully. In terms of repotting, every 2 to 3 years is ideal. You want to repot if the media is breaking down on you. You could probably get away with not repotting for longer if you're using some high quality bark or something like orchiata bark or lava rock or something like that. You could go longer. But But I say every 2 to 3 years is ideal. My little stars, I had it in a small 4-inch pot. The roots completely took over that pot, so I up potted it with you guys in a short video in a clay pot, and I'm not even going to touch it this year, but next year it's going to overtake that pot. So if it's outgrowing the pot, you want to repot it. This one is kind of outgrowing, and I'll get it into something bigger soon. Who am I kidding? I'm going to leave it here until next spring. But if it's outgrowing the pot, you want to get it into another pot because you don't want roots growing outside completely, because then those can't get hydrated when you're watering. If you have low humidity, that's when that comes in. Then those roots can die off. So you want to make sure that it's just not growing outside of the pot too much. And that is pretty much it with this orchid. I know a lot of folks see my videos and they see that I always have something in bloom, and it's because I have mostly hybrids that are blooming. And in fact, I have a lot of Richard Mueller hybrids blooming right now. I might make a video showing all of them because I have like 4 or 5 blooming together, and you could get a good sense of what they all look like with different parents. But this is actually a parent of the Richard Mueller. The Richard Mueller is Brassavola Nodosa by Lelia Millery. And this adds a ton of vigor to everything. So the point I'm making is, you guys see that I often have a lot of orchids in bloom, and it's not because I'm the best grower. It's because I have very vigorous hybrids. So a lot of my plants have the Brassavola Nodosa in them. They have the Richard Mueller in them. These are very, very vigorous plants, and they oftentimes bloom multiple times a year. And I find that this species, this is the parent to a lot of different orchids, and in on its own, the species is vigorous. I mean, just think about it. It can grow on rocks. It can grow in very high heat conditions. It's very adaptable. So that's why I wanted to spotlight this orchid. It's wonderful. The fragrance is amazing. If you don't have it, I highly recommend it. I think it's quite easy, and it's very rewarding. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.